Hello everybody. This week and next week we're going to be reading a new book that somebody in my class recommended. She grabbed the book on the final day when I said I might have to read to you from home for a while. And the book is called Evacuee, a real-life World War II story. On the blurb it says, as the Second World War rages, nightly bombing raids mean life in London is becoming more and more dangerous. 12-year-old Jan is evacuated far from home to the Herefordshire countryside, away from family, friends and all that she knows. Read Jan's moving true story of life as an evacuee. She recalls her experiences as one of 2 million children who were uprooted from their homes and families during the course of the Second World War. Wow, 2 million children is a lot. I like reading things where there's a truth in them. Let's get started then. Chapter 1, September 1939. When the war with Germany started, I was staying with my grandmother in a little yachting town on the Essex coast called Brightlingsea. I went there every year for my summer holiday, sometimes with my younger sister Hazel, but usually on my own. My mother and father had a shop in London at Kensal Rise, and we lived in the flat over the shop. My father's parents used to have a farm in Brightlingsea, but the farm had been sold before I was born. My father became a shopkeeper and went to live in London. I used to wish we had always lived in Brightlingsea, where we could swim in the sea and play on the sand, and where one of my aunts had a hut high up on the stilts across the creek. When the tide came in, the water splashed almost up to the top of the steps to the hut, sometimes when we were having our tea. For a few pennies, one of the old sailors would ferry us back to the Hard, where we would climb out onto the slipway, even at high tide. It made a perfect day out, especially for us children. I loved staying with my grandmother. She had a big house full of interesting things in her attic, as my grandfather had been a sea captain, trunks full of old clothes in which we dressed up to act plays, and piles of old books. Apples from the orchard were stored in the attic between the beams, and there was always a smell of apples in there, even when they had all been used up. There was a big garden with a stream trickling through it with a series of little waterfalls, and my cousins and I played in the stream, sailing a small wooden yacht. Sometimes we would see small eels, frogs and toads. We often fell in the stream, but fortunately it was only shallow and we just got wet. It wasn't a dangerous place. I thought I would be going to Brightlingsea for every summer holiday during my childhood, but everything changed in 1939 when the war started, and I would not see my grandmother or Brightlingsea again for another 6 years. The year the war started, my mother, my sister Hazel, my baby brother Julian and I were all staying at Brightlingsea. We were just about to return to London, where I was going to begin at the senior school, the Covenant of Jesus and Mary in Willesden. But my mother decided we had better stay where we were, as London might be bombed. I didn't start school in Brightlingsea though. As nothing seemed to be happening, my mother thought that at any time the war would be over and we would all be going home to London. Nothing much happened at first. Just before the war started, the government was worried that Germany might drop bombs containing poisonous gases. Everyone had to stick brown paper strips all around the edges of their windows to stop the poisonous gases getting into the houses. The paper strips were also crisscrossed over the window panes to stop the glass falling into the room if a bomb fell. Gas masks were given out too, which we had to carry with us in a brown cardboard box whenever we went out. They were made of rubber and fitted over our heads with straps, with a mask sticking out at the front to stop us breathing in poisonous gas. They had a horrible smell when you put them on, and I hoped I would never have to use mine. My baby brother Julian had to be put in a zip-up cover with a clear window so you could see him, but he screamed so much every time he was put inside it, my mother took him out after a few minutes. Once everyone had their gas masks, there was a practice air raid siren so everyone could try on their gas masks and find a safe place to sit in their house, because there was no bomb shelters then. We sat under the veranda in the back garden. After this practice air raid, we did not hear the siren for a long time. People started to call it a phony war. On the 1st of September 1939, a school from London came to Brightlingsea, and the children were sent to stay with families in the town. The school was called George Green's School, and the youngest children were 11 years old, the same as me. They were called Evacuees and had come from a part of London called Poplar, where the docks were situated. At the time, much of the food in Britain imported came through the docks in London and other big cities. If the Germans decided to bomb London, they would target the docks, which meant that these children lived in a very dangerous place. So they had come to Brightlingsea with their teachers where they would be safe, or so it was thought at the time. The pupils, parents and families did not accompany them. My mother got to know the headmaster's wife, Mrs. Humphreys, as she was staying in a house with her husband and children not that far from where my grandmother lived. Mother spoke to her about what to do with me if it became unsafe to return to London. She needed to go back to the shop where she helped my father and did not want to leave me with my grandmother for an unknown amount of time, especially as I had no school to go to. It was a problem for her. Mrs. Humphreys assured her that if the war got worse and the children had to move to a safer place, I would be allowed to join George Green School, and she would see that I was happily settled. So my mother returned to London with Hazel and Julian, while I remained with my grandmother in Brightlingsea. She thought that leaving 3 of us in Brightlingsea would be too much for my grandmother, especially as Hazel and Julian were so young. Everybody thought that the war would be over by Christmas, but it had hardly started. The winter of 1939 into 1940 was very cold, and the River Colne, which flowed into the sea at Brightlingsea, froze over, as did the waterfalls in my grandmother's garden. I had never spent a winter holiday there, and Brightlingsea was very quiet. You couldn't go on the beach, and there was little to do. I'd soon read all of my uncle's childhood books, which weren't very interesting for a girl. To stop me getting too bored, my grandmother taught me how to use the large treadle sewing machine which stood in her warm kitchen. She had been a seamstress and had taught tailoring before she married my grandfather, and now she taught me how to stitch seams and to cut patterns out of brown paper. She made me a thick, warm navy winter coat and a navy gym slip and 2 blouses, so I would be ready if I had to join George Green School, as I did not have their uniform. Spring 1940. At last the spring arrived, and people began to look worried. France had fallen to the German army, and at the end of May our troops had retreated to the beaches of Dunkirk, on the north coast of France. All the little boats around our coast set out to rescue them, or to take them from the beaches to the big destroyers which were waiting in the deeper water to bring them back to England. The little boats from the Thames estuary and the seaports along the south coast set off to rescue them. Over 338,000 soldiers were rescued this way. The sea had stayed calm all the time, which helped the little boats to bring the men to safety. Now that France had surrendered to Germany, everyone was afraid the German army would invade Britain next, and that would be the end of the war. The Germans would have won. It was also thought that it was too dangerous for all the children who had been evacuated to coastal towns in the south and the east of our country to stay there. The coast might be bombed or invaded, so it was decided that the evacuees should be moved to somewhere safer. This meant the children in George Green School would be evacuated again, and this time I would be going with them. Wow, sounds scary, especially about the windows. I thought it was scary how they had to tape them up in case any poisonous gas goes through. And imagine having to carry a gas mask with you all the time. And I'm curious to know what the smell was actually like. I know it was terrible, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what the smell was like. Have a good rest of the day and join us for chapter 2 tomorrow.